The storm had been chasing Eliza Monroe for 3 days straight, but it wasn't the kind that brought rain. This storm wore a badge and carried a warrant with her name on it, and she knew that running wouldn't save her much longer. When her horse finally gave out on the edge of the Blackwood Ranch, collapsing in the mud with foam on its lips, she understood that her choices had narrowed to exactly two: face the marshal's justice for a crime she didn't commit, or throw herself on the mercy of whoever owned this sprawling piece of Montana territory. The ranch house stood like a fortress against the darkening sky, all timber and stone, with smoke curling from two chimneys. Eliza had heard stories about the man who owned Blackwood Ranch, whispers that traveled through saloons and trading posts. Cole Blackwood was a legend in these parts, a rancher who'd built an empire from nothing but grit and determination. They said he was fair but hard, the kind of man who kept his word even when it cost him. They also said he had secrets buried as deep as the prairie grass roots, and that he didn't take kindly to strangers. She had no choice but to become one anyway. Her legs trembled as she climbed the porch steps, each footfall echoing her heartbeat. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a man who matched the stories almost perfectly. Cole Blackwood stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and eyes the color of winter steel. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent more years under the sun than under a roof. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze because she'd learned long ago that showing weakness was the fastest way to lose everything. "You're running from something," he said, his voice deep and measured. It wasn't a question. "The law," Eliza replied, deciding that honesty might be her only currency here. "But I didn't do what they say I did. They all say that." Cole crossed his arms, but he didn't close the door. "What are they accusing you of?" "Murder!" The word tasted like ashes in her mouth. "They say I killed a man in Silver Creek, a banker named Vernon Hayes, but I was 50 miles away when it happened, working as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's shop." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, gone too fast for her to read. "Vernon Hayes is dead? You knew him?" "I knew of him. Had business dealings years back." Cole stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Come inside before you collapse. Then we'll talk about what happens next." The warmth of the ranch house enveloped her like an embrace, and Eliza felt her knees weaken with relief. The interior was surprisingly refined, with handcrafted furniture and books lining the walls, a contrast to the rough exterior. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. Cole poured her a cup of coffee without asking, his movements efficient and practiced. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, indicating a chair near the fire. Eliza sank into it gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm mug. "Why are you helping me?" "I haven't decided if I am yet," Cole replied, settling into the chair across from her. "But I know Marshal Cord and I know how he operates. He's a good lawman, but he's also ambitious. Sometimes he sees what he wants to see." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. And understand this, if I find out you're lying to me, I'll hand you over to Cord myself." Eliza took a shaky breath and began her story, watching Cole's face for any sign of judgment or disbelief. She told him about her life as a seamstress in Silver Creek, about the evening she'd returned to her boarding house to find Marshal Cord waiting with questions about Vernon Hayes. She explained how the banker had been found dead in his office, shot twice, and how witnesses claimed to have seen a woman matching her description fleeing the scene. She described her panic, her decision to run rather than trust a system that had failed her before, and her desperate journey across the territory. When she finished, silence filled the room except for the crackling fire. Cole sat motionless, his expression unreadable, and Eliza felt her hope beginning to drain away. Finally he spoke. "I'm going to make you an offer, Miss Monroe, and you're going to think carefully before you answer. You need safety, and I need something too. A trade, if you will." "What kind of trade?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at his land. "I need a wife." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to ignore and difficult to comprehend. Eliza set down her coffee cup, her hand suddenly unsteady. Of all the things she'd expected Cole Blackwood to ask for, This hadn't even crossed her mind. A wife. The word carried weight and meaning that went far beyond a simple arrangement, and yet his tone suggested he meant it as exactly that, an arrangement, nothing more. You're proposing marriage to a woman accused of murder? Eliza finally managed, her voice sharp with disbelief. A woman you've known for all of 20 minutes? Cole turned from the window, his expression pragmatic rather than romantic. I'm proposing a solution to both our problems. You need protection from the law, and I need legitimacy. He returned to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Let me explain something about this territory, Miss Monroe. I've built Blackwood Ranch into one of the most successful operations in Montana, but success breeds enemies. There are men who want what I've built, who are looking for any weakness they can exploit. And being unmarried is a weakness? Eliza couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. In the eyes of certain people, yes. The territorial governor is pushing for statehood, and he's made it clear that the land grants and water rights will favor established families. Men with wives and prospects for children, settlers who'll build communities rather than just extract wealth. I've already lost 2 contracts because the governor's advisors deemed me unstable for a long-term partnership. The bitterness in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. I need a wife to secure my future here. You need a husband to secure your present survival. It's practical. Eliza studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. She'd learned to read men during her years of independence, learned to spot the ones who smiled while planning cruelty. Cole Blackwood didn't smile much, but his directness carried its own form of honesty. Still, marriage was a cage, even when entered willingly. She'd spent the last 5 years building her freedom, working for herself, answering to no one. The thought of surrendering that independence, even to save her life, felt like a kind of death. What exactly would this marriage entail? She asked carefully. What would you expect from me? Cole's expression didn't change. You'd take my name and live here as my wife in the eyes of the law and the community. You'd manage the household, which currently runs on the efforts of my foreman's wife, Rosa, who has enough to do without adding my domestic chaos to her responsibilities. You'd appear with me at social functions, help me build the kind of reputation that opens doors rather than closes them. He paused, his next words measured and deliberate. I wouldn't expect anything else. The marriage would be legal and binding, but what happens inside these walls would be our own business. Separate rooms, separate lives beyond the public face we'd present? You're asking me to trade my freedom for safety, Eliza said quietly, understanding the full scope of what he offered. To become Mrs. Cole Blackwood, to live under your name and your authority. Also, you can secure land rights and I can escape a noose. I'm asking you to make a choice, Cole corrected. Freedom without safety isn't freedom at all, Miss Monroe. It's just a longer road to the same end. And I'm not asking you to live under my authority. I'm asking you to live under my protection. There's a difference. Eliza wanted to argue, to insist that she could find another way, but exhaustion and reality weighed too heavily. She had nowhere else to go, no other cards to play, and yet something in Cole's proposal intrigued her beyond mere desperation. He wasn't trying to save her out of charity or take advantage of her vulnerability. He was offering a trade between equals, each bringing something the other needed to the table. There was a strange kind of respect in that, a recognition of her value even in her lowest moment. What about the murder charge? She asked. Marshal Cord won't stop looking for me just because I've married into respectability. Eventually he'll come here. Let him come. Cole's voice hardened with confidence. As my wife, you'd have legal protections. I have lawyers, good ones, who can fight this properly. More than that, I have influence. Not enough to make charges disappear, but enough to ensure you get a fair hearing rather than a rushed judgment. And if you're telling the truth about your innocence, then we'll find a way to prove it. And if I'm lying? Eliza challenged, wanting to see how far his commitment extended. Cole met her eyes without flinching. Then I'll have made a mistake in judgment, and I'll deal with the consequences, but I don't think you're lying. I've known enough liars to recognize when someone's telling the truth, even when it costs them. The fire popped and sparked, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Eliza thought about her alternatives, weighing them against this unexpected offer. She could refuse, walk back out into the night, and hope to outrun justice long enough to find proof of her innocence. But hope was a thin shield against determined lawmen in winter cold. She could turn herself in, trust the legal system to see the truth, but she'd already tried that path when she was younger, and it had taught her that justice wasn't blinded, just couldn't always see past prejudice and convenience. Or she could accept Cole Blackwood's proposal, trade her hard-won independence for the safety of his name and the promise of a fighting chance. It wasn't what she wanted, but it might be what she needed. "I have conditions," Eliza said finally, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Cole nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "I'd expect nothing less." "Name them." "First, I want it in writing that I keep any money I earn through my own work. I'm a skilled seamstress, and I won't be idle. Whatever I make is mine." She'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching her mother lose everything to a husband who controlled every penny. "Agreed. Second, if we prove my innocence and clear my name, I want the option to leave this marriage with my freedom intact. No legal entanglements, no fights over property. A clean separation if that's what I choose?" Cole hesitated, and Eliza saw the calculation in his eyes. This condition cost him more than the first, threatened the very stability he sought. But after a long moment, he nodded. "Agreed, with one provision. The separation won't happen for at least 2 years. I need time to establish the marriage as legitimate, to secure the contracts and rights I'm after. 2 years, and then if you want to leave, I won't stand in your way." 2 years. It sounded like a lifetime and a blink simultaneously. Eliza swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. "Third," she continued, "I want your word that you'll help me find out who really killed Vernon Hayes. Not just clear my name, but find the truth. Whoever did this destroyed my life, and they're walking free while I run." "That's not justice. You want revenge," Cole observed without judgment. "I want truth," Eliza corrected. "And yes, I want whoever framed me to face consequences. Can you help me with that, or are you only interested in the parts of this arrangement that benefit you?" Cole stood and extended his hand toward her. "I can help you. I will help you. You have my word, Miss Monroe, and around here, that's worth more than any legal contract." His hand remained steady, waiting for her decision. Eliza looked at that outstretched hand, seeing in it both a lifeline and a chain. She thought about everything she'd be giving up, every hard-fought piece of independence she'd claimed for herself. She thought about the noose waiting for her if Marshall Cord caught up, about the true killer walking free, about the life she'd built in Silver Creek now turned to ash and accusation. Then she thought about Cole Blackwood's eyes, direct and honest, about his practical proposal that treated her as a partner rather than a possession. She thought about the chance to fight back, to prove her innocence, to reclaim her life on her own terms rather than lose it to fear and flight. She reached out and clasped his hand, feeling the rough calluses of a working man against her palm. "I accept your offer, Mr. Blackwood, but understand this. I'm not a woman who settles for less than what's promised. If you break your word, marriage or not, I'll find a way to make you regret it." Cole's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Monroe. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch." The wedding took place 3 days later in the ranch's living room, witnessed by Rosa Martinez and her husband Miguel, the ranch foreman, along with Cole's lawyer, a shrewd man named Arthur Pemberton, who arrived from Helena with documents that would bind Eliza's fate to Cole's in the eyes of the law. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike, conducted by a traveling preacher who asked no questions and seemed content with the generous fee Cole provided. Eliza wore a simple blue dress that Rosa had altered to fit her, and Cole wore his Sunday suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothing but standing straight and steady as he spoke the vows that would change both their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole shook her hand instead of kissing her, and Eliza felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment that she couldn't quite name Mrs. Eliza Blackwood. The name felt foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she'd never learned, but she wore it anyway because it was armor now, protection against the accusations that hunted her. The days that followed settled into an unexpected routine. Cole spent most of his time managing the ranch, riding out before dawn to check on cattle and fences, meeting with his ranch hands, handling the endless details that kept a spread this size running. Eliza took over the household management from Rosa, who seemed relieved to return her full attention to her own family and her duties as cook for the ranch hands. The work was different from what Eliza was used to, more varied and physical than her seamstress days, but she found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos of Cole's domestic life. They maintained separate bedrooms as promised, meeting mainly at meals and in the evening hours when Cole would sit by the fire with his account books while Eliza worked on sewing projects. The silence between them was surprisingly comfortable, requiring no forced conversation or pretense of affection. It reminded Eliza of the companionable quiet she'd shared with her father before he died, the peace of two people content to exist in the same space without needing to fill every moment with words. But peace was fragile, and on the 8th day of their marriage, Marshal Thomas Cord arrived at Blackwood Ranch. Eliza was in the kitchen when she heard the horses outside, 3 of them by the sound of it. She moved to the window and felt her blood turn to ice water when she saw Cord dismounting, his deputy and another man flanking him. The marshal was exactly as she remembered, tall and lean, with a face like a hawk and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been kind enough when questioning her in Silver Creek, almost apologetic, but she'd seen the determination beneath his courtesy. He was a man who believed in the law absolutely, and once he'd decided she was guilty, nothing would shake that conviction. Cole appeared from the barn, walking with the easy confidence of a man on his own land. Eliza couldn't hear the conversation through the window, but she watched Cole's posture carefully, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way he positioned himself between the marshal and the house. After several minutes of discussion, Cole nodded and gestured toward the house. They were coming inside? Eliza moved away from the window, her heart hammering. She'd known this moment would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. She straightened her spine, smoothed her apron, and prepared to face the man who wanted to hang her for a crime she didn't commit. The door opened, and Cole entered first, his eyes finding hers immediately with a look that tried to convey reassurance. Marshal Cord followed, removing his hat as he stepped inside, his gaze sharp and assessing as it landed on Eliza. Recognition flared in his expression, followed by something that might have been disappointment. "Miss Monroe," he said, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Blackwood, I suppose I should say. Congratulations on your marriage. Marshal Cord." Eliza kept her voice level, refusing to show the fear that churned in her gut. "I'd say it's nice to see you again, but we both know that would be a lie." Cord's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I appreciate the honesty. I wish you'd been honest with me back in Silver Creek before you decided to run." "Running made you look guilty, Mrs. Blackwood. Staying would have made me dead," Eliza replied. "I've seen how frontier justice works, Marshal. Sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as convenience. That's a harsh assessment of the law I serve." Cord's tone remained professional, but Eliza caught the hint of offense. "It's an honest one," she said. "You'd already decided I killed Vernon Hayes before you had all the facts." "I could see it in your eyes." Cole stepped forward, inserting himself into the conversation with subtle authority. "My wife has agreed to answer your questions, Marshal, but she do so with legal representation present. Arthur Pemberton is coming from Helena and should arrive within the hour. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you'd extend her the courtesy of proper legal procedure." Cord's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I can wait an hour. But understand this, Blackwood. I don't care how much land you own or how many influential friends you have. If your wife is guilty of murder, she faced trial. Marriage doesn't grant immunity from justice." "I'm not asking for immunity," Cole replied, his voice hardening. "I'm asking for fairness." "There's a difference." The marshal and his men waited in the living room while Eliza retreated to her bedroom, Cole following close behind. Once the door closed, she let out a shaky breath, her composure cracking slightly. "He's not going to let this go," she said quietly. "He rode all the way here from Silver Creek. That means he's serious about seeing this through." "Let him be serious," Cole said. "We knew this was coming. That's why I had Pemberton draw up the papers making our marriage ironclad from a legal standpoint. As my wife, you have protections you didn't have as a single woman fleeing from the law. Pemberton will ensure Cord follows proper procedure. And if proper procedure still ends with me standing trial, Cole moved closer, and for the first time since their wedding, he reached out to touch her, his hand settling on her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Then we prove your innocence. I made you a promise, Eliza. I intend to keep it. The use of her first name, spoken with such quiet conviction, steadied her more than any legal argument could have. She met his eyes and saw determination there, a fierceness that went beyond their business arrangement. Somewhere in the past week, Cole Blackwood had stopped seeing her as merely a solution to his problem and had started seeing her as someone worth protecting for her own sake. When Arthur Pemberton arrived, he brought with him a briefcase full of legal documents and a mind sharp enough to match Marshal Cord's determination. The questioning that followed was intense, with Cord pressing for details about Eliza's whereabouts on the night of the murder, her relationship with Vernon Hayes, and her reasons for fleeing. Pemberton objected to the more aggressive questions, citing proper legal boundaries, but allowed Eliza to tell her story in full. She explained again about working late at Mrs. Patterson's shop, about walking home along the usual route, about hearing the news of Hayes's murder the next morning when the marshal came calling. She described her panic when she realized the witnesses had described a woman matching her appearance, wearing a blue dress with white lace trim exactly like one she owned. Because someone wanted it to look like me, Eliza said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. Vernon Hayes had enemies, Marshal. He was a banker who foreclosed on half the properties in Silver Creek, but instead of investigating who really wanted him dead, you took the easy path and blamed the convenient stranger. Cord's expression remained impassive. We found your scarf at the scene. Blue silk with your initials embroidered in the corner. Mrs. Patterson confirmed she'd seen you wearing it earlier that day. Eliza felt her stomach drop. She'd wondered about that scarf, the one that had gone missing from her room a week before the murder. She'd assumed she'd simply misplaced it, but now the truth crystallized with horrible clarity. Someone had stolen it, used it to frame her, and she'd played right into their hands by running. I lost that scarf days before the murder, she said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. Someone must have taken it. A convenient explanation, Cord replied. Can anyone verify this? Silence stretched between them. No one could verify it because Eliza had lived alone, had kept to herself, had prided herself on her independence. That independence now threatened to destroy her. Cole spoke into the silence, his voice calm but carrying an edge that demanded attention. Marshal, I'd like to share something with you. Something about Vernon Hayes that might interest you? Cord turned his sharp gaze to Cole. What about him? Hayes tried to foreclose on Blackwood Ranch 5 years ago. He claimed I'd defaulted on a loan I'd never taken, produced forged documents with my signature, and nearly succeeded in stealing everything I'd built. It took me 6 months and most of my savings to prove the documents were fraudulent and get the claim dismissed. Hayes walked away without consequences because he had connections in Silver Creek that protected him. This information landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading through the room. Cord's expression sharpened with renewed interest. You're saying Hayes was involved in fraud on a larger scale? I'm saying Hayes was crooked and I wasn't his only victim. There were others, probably dozens, who lost their property to his schemes. Any one of them would have had motive to kill him. But you focused on Eliza because she was an easy target, a single woman with no powerful connections to defend her. Cole's voice carried a challenge now. You want justice, Marshal? Then do your job properly. Investigate Hayes's business dealings, find out who else he'd wronged, and stop assuming the first convenient suspect is the guilty one. Cord was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this information. Finally, he stood, placing his hat back on his head. I'll look into Hayes's business dealings, but that doesn't clear your wife, Blackwood. It just adds more names to my list of suspects. He looked at Eliza, and something in his expression had softened slightly. Don't leave the territory, Mrs. Blackwood. I'll be in touch. After the marshal left, Eliza sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. Cole dismissed Pemberton with thanks and payment, then returned to sit across from her, the fire crackling between them. You never told me about Hayes trying to steal your ranch, Eliza said quietly. You let me think this was just about land grants and political connections. It was about those things too, Cole replied. But you're right, there was more to it. Hayes ruined good people, Eliza. He destroyed families and walked away rich. When I heard he was dead, I won't lie, I felt satisfaction. But I didn't kill him, and I don't believe you did either. Then who did? That's what we're going to find out. The investigation began in earnest the next morning, with Cole proving that his promise to help wasn't empty words. He had connections throughout the territory that Eliza had never imagined, a network of ranchers, businessmen, and even a few sympathetic lawmen who owed him favors. Within 2 days, Cole had assembled a picture of Vernon Hayes's business dealings that painted the banker as even more corrupt than either of them had suspected. Hayes had been involved in a scheme to fraudulently acquire properties throughout Silver Creek and the surrounding territory, using forged documents and corrupt judges to steal land from people who couldn't afford to fight back legally. The scheme had made Hayes and his partners wealthy, but it had also created a long list of people with motive for murder. Cole's own case had been one of the few where the intended victim had enough resources to fight back and win. Eliza threw herself into helping with the investigation, using her skills as a seamstress to maintain her cover while gathering information. She reached out to former clients in Silver Creek through carefully worded letters, asking about their experiences with Hayes and his bank. The responses that came back told stories of heartbreak and loss, families driven from their homes, businesses destroyed by manipulated loans and impossible interest rates. But among the letters, one stood out. It came from Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, Eliza's former employer, and it contained information that changed everything. Dear Eliza, the letter read, I was shocked to hear of your marriage and even more shocked to learn that Marshal Cord suspects you of killing Vernon Hayes. I know you are innocent, child, and I believe I know who is guilty. Hayes's law clerk, Daniel Morrison, came to see me 2 weeks ago, asking questions about you, where you lived, what you wore, your habits and schedule. I thought nothing of it at the time, assumed it was related to some legal matter. But now I wonder if he was gathering information for darker purposes. Morrison had reason to hate Hayes. I overheard them arguing once, something about Morrison wanting his share of profits from their business dealings. Hayes laughed at him, called him a clerk who would always be a clerk. Morrison's face went white with rage. I thought nothing of it then, but now I wonder if I witnessed a motive for murder. Please be careful, and know that you have friends here who believe in you. Eliza showed the letter to Cole immediately, watching his expression darken as he read. Morrison, he said quietly. I know that name. He handled the forged paperwork in Hayes's attempt to steal my ranch. I assumed he was just following orders, but if he was Hayes's partner in the scheme, then he had motive and opportunity, Eliza finished. And he knew enough about me to frame me for the crime. He must have stolen my scarf when he visited the dress shop on some pretext, prepared the whole scene to make it look like I'd done it. We need to tell Marshal Cord, Cole said, already moving toward his desk to write a telegram. Will he believe us? Eliza asked, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. We have a letter from my former employer and speculation. No proof. Then we'll get proof. Cole looked up from the telegram he was writing, his expression determined. I'm going to Silver Creek, and I'm going to find it. I'm coming with you, Eliza said immediately. No, it's too dangerous. If Cord sees you in Silver Creek, Cole. Eliza moved closer, placing her hand over his on the desk. You promised me we'd find the truth together. I need to be there. This is my life we're fighting for, my freedom. I won't sit here safely while you take all the risks. Cole searched her face, and Eliza saw the moment he recognized her determination, understood that she wouldn't be swayed. Finally, he nodded. Together then, but we do this carefully. Morrison is dangerous if he's capable of murder. They left for Silver Creek the next morning, telling Rosa and Miguel they'd be gone for several days on business. The journey took 2 days of hard riding, and Eliza found herself grateful for the practical riding clothes Rosa had helped her acquire, so different from the confining dresses she'd worn as a seamstress. The trail gave them time to talk in ways they hadn't before, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Eliza learned that Cole had grown up poor, the son of a failed farmer, and had built his ranch through years of backbreaking work and calculated risks. He'd never planned to marry, he admitted, because he'd seen too many marriages built on necessity rather than affection end in bitterness and resentment. Is that what you think ours will become? Eliza asked as they made camp the second night, the fire casting shadows across his face. Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I thought it would be different," he finally said. "I thought we'd live separate lives under the same roof, fulfill our obligations and nothing more. But you're not what I expected, Eliza. You're stronger, fiercer. You don't bend just because life pushes you." I admire that. The admission hung between them, changing something fundamental in their arrangement. Eliza felt her heart quicken, recognizing that the practical marriage they'd agreed to was transforming into something neither had planned for. She wasn't ready to name it, wasn't sure she wanted to acknowledge it, but the feeling was there nonetheless, growing like a seed planted in fertile soil. They reached Silver Creek after dark on the third day, entering the town carefully to avoid drawing attention. Cole had arranged for them to stay at a boarding house on the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Calloway who asked no questions and valued her guests' privacy. From there, they began their careful investigation of Daniel Morrison. Morrison lived in a modest house near the bank where he'd worked as Hayes's clerk. Cole and Eliza watched the house for 2 days, learning Morrison's patterns, noting when he came and went. The man was younger than Eliza had expected, perhaps 30, with a nervous energy that made him glance over his shoulder frequently as he walked. He looked like someone carrying a heavy burden of guilt. On the third night, Cole broke into Morrison's house while the clerk was at dinner with friends, with Eliza standing watch outside. She'd argued against splitting up, but Cole had insisted, saying that if they were caught, it would be better if only one of them faced charges for breaking and entering. The minutes dragged like hours as Eliza waited in the shadows, every sound making her jump, every movement in the darkness threatening to be Marshal Cord or his deputies. When Cole finally emerged, he carried a leather satchel and wore an expression of grim satisfaction. They hurried back to Mrs. Calloway's boarding house, locked themselves in their room, and examined the contents of the satchel together. What they found was damning beyond their expectations. Morrison had kept detailed records of his partnership with Hayes, documenting every fraudulent foreclosure, every forged document, every property stolen through their scheme. More importantly, he'd kept the journal, and the entries from the weeks before Hayes's murder told the story of a partnership dissolving into hatred. "Hayes threatened to expose me," one entry read, Morrison's handwriting growing more erratic as the pages progressed. "Said he'd tell the marshal everything, claim I acted alone in the forgeries while he was an innocent victim. He's going to destroy me to save himself. I can't let that happen." "I won't let that happen." The entry dated 2 days before the murder was the most chilling. "I've found the perfect scapegoat. The seamstress Eliza Monroe. She's new to town, no family, no connections. Hayes had her do some work on his wife's dresses, so there's a connection. I borrowed one of her scarves today while picking up an alteration. It will be enough to point Cord in her direction while I disappear with my share of the money. Hayes will get what he deserves, and I'll finally be free of this cursed partnership." Eliza felt cold reading the words, seeing her life reduced to a convenient detail in Morrison's plan. She'd been nothing to him but a tool, a way to escape the consequences of his own crimes. The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. "We have him," Cole said quietly, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "This is proof, Eliza. This is everything we need to clear your name." They took the evidence to Marshal Cord first thing the next morning, watching as the lawman read through Morrison's journal with growing anger. When he finished, he looked at Eliza with something that might have been an apology in his eyes. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Blackwood," he said stiffly. "I should have investigated more thoroughly before deciding on your guilt. You have my word that Morrison will face justice for what he's done." The arrest happened swiftly. Cord and his deputies found Morrison at the bank, attempting to withdraw a large sum of money from an account Hayes had maintained for their illegal proceeds. Morrison tried to run, but Cord was faster, and within an hour the clerk was in chains, facing charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Eliza watched from a distance as Morrison was led to the jailhouse, feeling not triumph but a strange emptiness. Her name would be cleared, her freedom restored, but the cost of that freedom weighed heavily. A man was dead, another would hang, and she'd lost months of her life to fear and flight. The victory felt hollow. Cole seemed to sense her mood as they prepared to return to the ranch. "Justice isn't always satisfying," he said as they rode out of Silver Creek for the last time, "but it's still necessary. You did nothing wrong, Eliza. Remember that. I keep thinking about the person I was before this happened, Elisa replied, watching the town disappear behind them. The woman who believed she could build a life on her own terms, who thought independence was the only thing worth having. That woman feels like a stranger now. Maybe that woman still exists, Cole said. Maybe she's just learned that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, that accepting help doesn't make you weak. They rode in silence for a while, the Montana landscape stretching endlessly around them. Finally, Eliza spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. What happens now? My name is cleared, the charges dropped. Our arrangement said I could leave after 2 years if I wanted, but we're not even close to that yet. Cole didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. Do you want to leave? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had been willing to voice before. Eliza thought about the ranch that had become home, about Rosa's kindness and Miguel's quiet respect. She thought about the comfortable silence she and Cole had built, the way they'd learned to exist in each other's space without friction or pretense. She thought about the man riding beside her who'd kept every promise, who'd fought for her freedom without asking for anything in return except the practical arrangement they'd agreed to. Somewhere along the way, that arrangement had become something more. She'd fallen in love with Cole Blackwood, not with dramatic gestures or romantic declarations, but with the quiet, steady certainty of seasons changing, inevitable and right. No, she said finally, meeting his eyes. I don't want to leave. Spring came to Blackwood Ranch with a gentleness that seemed to mirror the changes unfolding between Cole and Eliza. The harsh winter had given way to warm breezes and new grass, and with it came a softening in their relationship that felt as natural as the season itself. The separate bedrooms remained, but the space between them had filled with something neither had anticipated when they'd made their practical arrangement. Months before, genuine affection built on shared challenges, mutual respect, and the deep satisfaction of partnership. Marshal Cord's official exoneration arrived in early April, a legal document that cleared Eliza's name completely and apologized for the error in judgment that had nearly cost an innocent woman her life. Morrison had confessed to everything in exchange for a prison sentence instead of hanging, and the full scope of his and Hayes' fraud had been exposed, bringing justice to the families they'd wronged. Eliza read the document 3 times, feeling the weight of months of fear finally lift from her shoulders. She found Cole in the barn that afternoon, working on repairs to a stall door with his usual methodical precision. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face at the sight of her was warmer than any she'd seen from him before. It's done, she said simply, holding up the document. I'm free. Completely legally, officially free. Cole set down his tools and crossed to her, taking the paper and reading it carefully. When he looked up, his expression was complex, mixing relief with something that looked like concern. This means you can leave now if you want. The 2-year provision was for your protection, but you don't need that anymore. Eliza had expected this conversation, had been rehearsing her answer since she'd first realized her feelings for the man who'd saved her in more ways than one. Do you want me to leave? No, the answer came quickly without hesitation. But I won't hold you to an agreement you made under duress either. You married me because you had no other choice. Eliza, now you have all the choices in the world. She moved closer, closing the distance between them in a way she'd been too cautious to do before. What if I choose to stay? Not because I have to, but because I want to? Cole's eyes searched hers, and Eliza saw hope warring with caution in their depths. Why would you want to stay? You could go anywhere, build the independent life you had before all this happened. You could open your own dress shop, work for yourself, answer to no one. That's what you wanted, wasn't it? It was, Eliza agreed. But I've learned something these past months, something I didn't expect. Independence isn't about being alone. It's about choosing who you let into your life, who you build something with. I thought freedom meant relying on no one, but real freedom is choosing your partnerships, your connections, your commitments. She reached out, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her palm. I choose you, Cole, not because you saved me, not because I owe you anything, but because somewhere between running for my life and fighting to clear my name, I fell in love with the man who kept every promise he made. Cole was very still for a moment, and Eliza saw the emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, joy, fear, hope. Then he reached up, covering her hand with his, holding it against his heart. "I never expected this," he said quietly. "I thought I was offering you a business arrangement, a practical solution to both our problems. I didn't plan on you becoming the best part of my days, the person I looked forward to seeing every morning. I didn't plan on falling in love with my wife." The admission hung between them for a heartbeat. And then Eliza found herself pulled into his arms, finally experiencing the embrace they'd carefully avoided throughout their marriage. He held her with a gentleness that contradicted his rough exterior, and when he finally kissed her, it was with the reverence of someone who'd waited too long and knew the value of what they'd finally claimed. "Stay," Cole murmured against her hair. "Not as part of an arrangement, not as Mrs. Blackwood, the legal wife. Stay as Eliza, the woman I love, the partner I want to build a real life with." "I'm staying," Eliza promised, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "But I have a condition." Cole raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at his lips. "Always with the conditions." "This is an important one," she said seriously. "I want to help the families Hayes and Morrison hurt. I want to use some of the money from my sewing work to establish a fund that helps people fight fraudulent foreclosures, that gives them access to legal representation they can't afford on their own. I want something good to come from all this suffering." The smile that broke across Cole's face was brilliant. "I'll match whatever you contribute, and I'll use my connections to make sure the fund is properly established and managed. We'll do it together." "Together," Eliza agreed, and the word felt like a promise greater than any wedding vow. "I like the sound of that." The summer that followed was one of hard work and deep satisfaction as they transformed their marriage from paper convenience to genuine partnership. Eliza expanded her sewing business, taking commissions from women throughout the territory, while also managing the household and helping Cole with the ranch's administrative work. They established the Hayes Recovery Fund, named ironically after the man whose crimes had made it necessary, and within months it was helping families throughout Montana Territory fight against predatory lending and land theft. Rosa and Miguel watched the transformation with knowing smiles, and one evening over dinner, Rosa pulled Eliza aside. "I knew from the first day," she said in her accented English. "I saw how he looked at you, even when he was pretending it was just business. And I saw how you looked at him too, even when you were too scared to admit it to yourself. Were we that obvious?" Eliza asked, embarrassed. Rosa laughed warmly. "Only to someone who knows what love looks like when it's growing. You two were like seeds planted in winter, waiting for the right season to bloom. Now look at you, you've created something beautiful together." Autumn brought news that Montana was moving forward with statehood, and with it came the land grants and water rights Cole had sought when he'd first proposed their arrangement. But when the documents arrived, officially recognizing Blackwood Ranch as a permanent family establishment, Cole insisted on having both their names on the deed, equal partners in ownership. "This is our land," he said as they signed the papers together. "Our home, our future. I don't want any part of what we've built to be owned by just one of us. We're in this together, Eliza, equal in every way." It was this gesture, more than any words of love or romantic gesture, that showed Eliza how completely Cole had embraced their partnership. He'd given her not just his name and protection, but his trust, his respect, and his commitment to building something neither of them could have created alone. That winter, as they sat by the fire that had witnessed the beginning of their unexpected journey together, Eliza reflected on how far they'd come from that desperate night when she'd arrived at his door, running from charges she couldn't fight alone. She'd traded her freedom for safety, or so she'd thought, but in reality, she'd discovered that true freedom wasn't about standing alone against the world. It was about finding someone who would stand beside you, who would fight your battles as if they were their own, who would offer partnership instead of possession. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked one evening, seeming to read her thoughtful mood. "The way we started? The arrangement that brought you here?" Eliza considered the question carefully, thinking about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. She thought about the independent seamstress she'd been, proud and alone, building a life on her own terms, but always keeping the world at arm's length. She thought about the terror of being accused, the desperation of her flight, the moment she'd stood on Cole's porch and made a bargain that had felt like surrender. "No," she said finally, moving to sit beside him, his arm coming around her shoulders as naturally as breathing. "I thought I was giving up my freedom that night, but I was wrong. I was just trading one kind of freedom for another. The freedom to stand alone for the freedom to choose my partner. The freedom to rely on no one for the freedom to build something lasting with someone I trust completely. The freedom of isolation for the freedom of love." She looked up at him, seeing in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart. "You changed me, Cole Blackwood. Not by demanding I become something different, but by showing me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. That accepting help isn't weakness. That partnership can be the greatest form of independence because you choose it freely every single day." Cole pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You changed me too. You taught me that business arrangements can become something real, that practical decisions can lead to profound love, that sometimes the best things in life come from the unexpected turns. I offered you safety, but you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. A home, not just a house. A partner, not just a wife. A future worth building, not just an empire worth protecting." As snow began to fall outside, covering the Montana landscape in pristine white, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found something neither had been looking for, but both had needed desperately. The rancher who'd needed legitimacy and the fugitive who'd needed safety had created something far more valuable than either had imagined. A love built on respect, equality, and the courage to transform a desperate bargain into a lasting commitment. The story of how Eliza Monroe became Eliza Blackwood would be told for years in the Montana Territory, a tale of justice, redemption, and unexpected love. But to Eliza and Cole, it wasn't a story at all. It was simply their life, built together through challenges and triumphs, through practical beginnings and profound endings, through the simple daily choice to honor the promises they'd made and the love they'd found. She'd traded her freedom for safety, or so the story went, but the truth was far more complex and beautiful. She discovered that real freedom wasn't about standing alone, but about choosing who to stand with. She'd learned that safety wasn't found in isolation, but in partnership. And she'd realized that sometimes the best way to reclaim your life is to share it with someone who values it as much as you do. What the rancher offered did change her forever, but not in the way she'd feared. Cole Blackwood hadn't taken her independence. He'd redefined it. He hadn't trapped her in a cage of his making. He'd opened a door to a future she'd never imagined. He'd offered her not just his name and protection, but his respect, his partnership, and eventually his love. And Eliza, who'd started that desperate night with nothing but fear and determination, had found something she'd never dared hope for, a home, a partner, and a love that made her stronger rather than weaker, freer rather than bound. The snow continued to fall as they sat by the fire, two people who'd become one partnership, writing the next chapter of their story together with every shared glance, every comfortable silence, every moment of connection. The desperate bargain had become a lasting love. The practical arrangement had transformed into a profound commitment, and the woman who'd run from the law had finally found the one thing she'd been searching for all along without even knowing it, a place where she truly belonged, with a man who saw her not as a possession or a convenience, but as an equal, a partner, and the love of his life. This was the freedom she'd really been seeking all along, Eliza realized. Not the freedom to be alone, but the freedom to choose love. Not the freedom from obligation, but the freedom to commit to something worth fighting for. Not the freedom of isolation, but the freedom of coming home. And what a beautiful freedom it was.